I still remember the way the light hit the table that Sunday, warm, peaceful, like nothing bad could ever happen under it. Then my dad leaned forward, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You'll give me half of your pension," he told my grandpa. No hesitation. No shame. My stepmom nodded, pretending it was the most natural thing in the world. Grandpa didn't argue. He just smiled, the kind of calm, heavy smile that hides more than it shows. Then he stood up, slowly, deliberately, and said, "The plan begins now." Everyone laughed, thinking he was just being dramatic. But when he walked away, something in his silence terrified me. 3 weeks later, that same house would be in ruins, my father's career destroyed, and my grandpa, the quiet man they tried to use, would prove he'd never been powerless. That Sunday started like any other family lunch: laughter, the smell of roast chicken, sunlight filtering through the curtains. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, calm and quiet, like always. My dad, Mark, was in one of his business moods, talking about bills, mortgage, and how everyone has to contribute. I noticed the tension before the words even came. Dad's voice dropped lower, more controlled. "You live here for free, Dad," he said, slicing his steak. "Half of your pension should cover rent. It's only fair." The fork slipped from my hand. I looked at him, waiting for a laugh, a joke, anything, but he was serious. My stepmother, Lisa, nodded without even looking up from her plate. "Yes, Mark's right. It's just practical. You have income, we have expenses." Grandpa set down his coffee mug and stared at the table for a moment. Then he looked up, eyes steady. "Fairness," he said softly, "is a word people use when they've already decided to be unfair." The air froze. No one spoke. Even my little brother Josh stopped chewing. Dad's face tightened. "We're just trying to balance things out. Don't make it emotional," he muttered. Grandpa didn't reply. He just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that told me he was finished with the conversation. He stood up slowly, pushed his chair back, and adjusted the sleeve of his old flannel shirt. "Enjoy your meal," he said quietly. "I think I've lost my appetite." Lisa sighed dramatically, whispering, "So sensitive." When Grandpa walked past me, I caught his hand for a second. His palm was warm but steady. He leaned toward me and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll see soon, Emma. People forget silence listens." That night, while the others were watching TV, I saw Grandpa sitting in the backyard, staring at the maple trees swaying under the fading light. A small notebook rested on his lap, its pages filled with handwriting so neat it looked printed. I asked softly, "Are you okay?" He smiled without looking up. "Better than I've been in years," he said. "Sometimes the storm doesn't come to destroy you, Emma. It comes to show who built their house right." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But that dinner, that single moment, cracked our family open. And once cracks appear, they never stop spreading. 3 days passed after that lunch, and the house felt different. The air was heavier, conversations shorter. My dad avoided Grandpa at breakfast, and Lisa suddenly began locking certain kitchen cabinets, muttering about organization. Grandpa didn't react. He spent most of his time upstairs, quiet, reading in his room or walking in the garden with that same mysterious calm. One afternoon, while looking for an old photo album, I went up to the attic, a dusty, slanted space that always smelled like cedar and thyme. As I moved aside a stack of boxes, something caught my eye. A small brown briefcase tucked behind a trunk, labeled Harper, 2010. Curiosity prickled my skin. I opened it. Inside were stacks of documents, thick envelopes, stamped papers, photocopies of checks. The top page read, "Purchase Agreement, 2847 Maple Street." My breath caught. That was our house. Every signature on the documents was my grandfather's, every payment slip, every repair receipt except for one line, the property title. That name belonged to my father, Mark Harper. I sank to the floor, my heart pounding. Grandpa had bought the entire house, but gave the title to Dad. And now, Dad was charging him rent? I took the briefcase downstairs, hands trembling. Grandpa was in the kitchen, washing dishes like nothing was wrong. "Grandpa," I whispered, placing the briefcase on the counter. What is this? He looked at it for a long moment before drying his hands. Then he smiled, faintly. So you found it, he said. You bought this house, didn't you? Every cent came from you. He nodded once. I did. 15 years ago. Your father was struggling young family, new job, too many bills. I wanted him to have stability. So I paid for it, but I let him put his name on the title. Thought it would help him build credit. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. And now he's making you pay rent? That's how life works, Emma, he said quietly, pouring tea. You build something strong, and sometimes the people you built it for try to sell the bricks back to you. The sadness in his voice hit me harder than anger ever could. Why don't you confront him? I asked. Confrontation only works when the other side has a conscience, he said. No, I think I'll handle this differently. He walked to the window, watching the sunlight fade over the lawn. They think age makes you blind, he murmured. But I see perfectly well, and I've been an engineer long enough to know one thing. He turned to me, eyes sharp as glass. Even the strongest house collapses if you remove the right beam. That night, I couldn't sleep. The attic, the documents, his words, they all echoed in my head. I didn't know it then, but Grandpa had already started removing the first beam. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the printer humming in the kitchen. Lisa was standing by the counter, arranging a neat stack of papers. When she noticed me, she smiled with that brittle politeness she used whenever she wanted to look in control. Morning, Emma. Just a little structure for everyone. I glanced at the title across the top page, House Rules and Expectations. There were bullet points, bold fonts, and underlines. Quiet hours, 10 p.m., 7 a.m. Kitchen access, shared schedule, Lisa has morning priority. Living room TV, for household use only. Utilities and maintenance, subject to contribution. At the bottom, in smaller print, effective immediately, applies to all residents, including Mr. Harper, Grandpa. I wanted to tear it up. Are you serious? I asked. It's not personal, Lisa said, her tone sugary. It's just about boundaries. Your grandfather needs structure. Structure? I repeated, feeling heat rise in my chest. He's 70, not a tenant. Dad walked in then, holding his travel mug like a shield. Emma, enough. It's just easier this way. Mom and I are busy. We can't have chaos here. Mom. He'd started calling Lisa Mom in front of me like rewriting history would make it real. Grandpa came downstairs right then, dressed neatly in his navy cardigan. He didn't even blink when Lisa handed him the paper. He took it, scanned it once, and folded it neatly into his pocket. Clear is good, he said calmly. Clarity helps everyone. Lisa blinked, thrown off by his composure. Exactly, she said quickly, thinking she'd won. After breakfast, Grandpa asked me to take a walk with him. The morning air was crisp, sunlight glinting off the dew in the grass. You didn't argue, I said quietly. No, he replied. Arguing only alerts the guilty before you're ready. We stopped near the fence, where he crouched to pull a weed from the soil. His movements were slow, precise. Emma, he said, when people start creating rules for you in your own home, they've already declared war. They just haven't said it out loud yet. I didn't know what to say. His calmness unnerved me like watching someone stand still while the ground cracked beneath them. That evening, when I passed his study, I saw him writing in his notebook. His pen moved methodically, each line dated and numbered. On the top margin, he had written one word in neat, careful letters. Evidence. I stood there, frozen in the hallway, realizing that Grandpa wasn't surrendering. He was documenting. And that's when I began to understand this wasn't going to be a quiet war. 2 days later, Grandpa asked me to drive him downtown. He was dressed in a pressed shirt, his gray hair combed neatly back, his briefcase resting on his lap. He looked more like a man going to seal a business deal than a retired grandfather being cornered by his own family. Where are we going? I asked as I started the car. To meet a man who understands both concrete and law, he said. Someone who knows that what's built on bad foundations eventually collapses. When we arrived, a polished brass plaque on the building read, James Morrison and Associates, Real Estate and Property Law. Inside, the lawyer greeted him warmly. mid-50s, glasses perched on his nose, sleeves rolled up. "Mr. Harper," he said, shaking Grandpa's hand. "Please have a seat. Tell me what's happening." Grandpa opened his briefcase, pulling out one document after another: the cashier's check, the house deed, the maintenance receipts, and the yellow note that said, "For my son's future." "I bought the house in 2010, Grandpa began. "Paid $340,000 cash. I put the title in my son's name to help him start strong. Now he's asking me for half my pension as rent." James adjusted his glasses, scanning each page. His expression grew sharper with every line. "You funded everything," he said slowly. "You have receipts, the check, your handwriting. That makes you the equitable owner." "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means," James said, leaning forward, "we can file for what's called a constructive trust. Under Oregon law, if one person pays for a property but another holds the title, the court can recognize the real owner, the one who provided the money." Grandpa smiled slightly. "Then it's time the court remembered me," James nodded. "You'll need to gather everything: proof of payment, maintenance, communication. The more precise, the stronger your case. Once we file, they'll be served within 48 hours. Grandpa reached into his wallet and wrote a check for $8,000 on the spot. His hand didn't even tremble. "Let's begin," he said. When we got home, the smell of dinner filled the air: roast chicken again, almost mockingly familiar. Lisa was at the table, typing on her laptop. Dad was flipping through papers. "You're late," Dad said flatly. "Just errands," Grandpa replied. Lisa slid a sheet of paper across the table. "Since you didn't confirm the rent, we've adjusted it to $1,500. Fair market rate for the neighborhood." Grandpa looked down at the paper, then at her. He smiled, just faintly. "Fairness," he said, "seems to get more expensive every week." Then, to my shock, he picked up the paper, signed it neatly, and tore it in half. "There," he said softly, placing the pieces on the table. "Now it's worth exactly what it deserves to be." Lisa's face turned red. Dad slammed his palm on the table. "Dad, you can't just—" "I can," Grandpa interrupted, his voice level, "because I've been paying for this house long before either of you called it home." He stood up, walked past them, and said over his shoulder, "You'll get your rent soon enough. Just not from me." That night, I found him in his study again, scanning documents into his laptop. His screen glowed against his face, calm, determined, unbreakable. "Grandpa," I whispered, "what are you doing?" He looked at me and smiled. "I'm rebuilding the foundation," he said. "This time, in my name." I didn't realize it then, but that was the night the quiet war became official. The day everything exploded started like nothing at all. A calm Tuesday, sunlight spilling through the windows, the smell of coffee and toast. Grandpa had gone to his regular medical checkup. He waved goodbye with that steady smile, telling me not to worry. By late afternoon, the quiet in the house started to feel wrong. The kind of wrong you can't name, but you can feel pressing at your ribs. When Grandpa came back, he looked tired, but when he reached the front door, his expression changed. His key wouldn't turn. He tried again. It didn't fit. He frowned, tested the lock once more, and then looked up. A brand new brass deadbolt gleamed in the sunlight. Dad opened the door halfway, blocking the entrance. Lisa stood behind him, arms crossed. "What's this?" Grandpa asked, voice calm but edged with steel. "A boundary," Dad said. "You don't live here anymore." "Excuse me? You sued us, didn't you?" Lisa snapped. "We know about the lawyer, the papers. Don't pretend." My stomach dropped. "Dad," I tried, but he cut me off. "Stay out of it, Emma. This is between adults." Grandpa looked at the two of them like a teacher watching children misbehave. "You've changed the locks on your own father," he said quietly. "Do you understand what you've done? You made your choice," Dad said coldly. "Now live with it." Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed record. His voice was low, steady, deliberate. "For the record," he said, "my name is Sylvester Harper. I have been unlawfully denied access to my residence at 2847 Maple Street by my son Mark Harper and his wife Lisa Harper. This constitutes an illegal lockout under Oregon tenancy law." Lisa's face went pale. You can't record us, she barked. I just did, Grandpa replied. Thank you for confirming your presence. Then he turned to me. His eyes softened for the first time all day. Come on, sweetheart, he said gently. Let's not give them the show they want. He walked away without looking back. That silence was louder than any shouting match could have been. That night, he checked into a small motel near the freeway, the Sunset Inn. A place that smelled like bleach and rain. I brought him food and his old jacket. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, a small lamp casting yellow light over the paperwork spread before him. You shouldn't be here, he said softly when I came in. You shouldn't be there, I shot back. They changed the locks, Grandpa. They stole your house. He smiled faintly, his calm unbroken. No, Emma, they just gave me the last piece of evidence I needed. He turned his phone toward me. He'd already labeled the video. Illegal lockout, 4:12 p.m. They think this is power, he said, but it's confession. 3 days later, Dad and Lisa were served. A process server showed up right at dinner time, handing over a thick envelope. Sylvester Harper v. Mark Harper and Lisa Harper, petition for constructive trust and illegal eviction. Lisa's scream echoed through the house. He's suing us? He's lost his mind, Dad shouted, throwing the papers onto the table. I watched from the hallway, frozen between shame and pride. Grandpa's war had officially begun, and he wasn't losing this one. That weekend, I went to visit Grandpa again. He was at the motel desk, sorting receipts into neat folders. Motel bills, food costs, copies of legal correspondence. Why are you keeping all this? I asked. Documentation, he said simply. They'll pay for every dollar they tried to take from me. He looked up at me then, eyes gleaming with quiet fire. Emma, do you know what happens when people build on a lie? I shook my head. The ground caves in. It always does. All you have to do, he said, tapping his temple, is stand still long enough to watch it happen. That night, I drove home alone. From outside, through the living room window, I could see Dad and Lisa arguing, her waving papers in the air, him pacing like a trapped animal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of their voices. I was scared for them, because my grandfather, the quiet man they thought they could corner, had just started a legal firestorm that neither of them was strong enough to survive. And somewhere deep down, I realized something chilling. He hadn't lost control. He'd given it to them just to see what they would do with it. And now, he was going to take it all back. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and nerves. I sat beside Grandpa that morning, clutching my bag like it could somehow keep my heart from pounding out of my chest. He looked calm, impossibly calm in his gray suit, a simple tie, and his worn leather briefcase resting by his feet. Dad and Lisa arrived 10 minutes late. She wore her favorite pearl earrings, like this was a brunch invitation, not a lawsuit. Dad didn't look at us. His jaw was tight, hands clenched in his lap. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The gavel cracked like thunder. Case number 20. 2-417. Harper versus Harper. Constructive trust and unlawful eviction. Hearing my last name repeated on both sides of the courtroom made me want to disappear. James Morrison stood and presented the first exhibit. A blown-up image of a cashier's check, $340,000, dated March 2010. Your Honor, he said clearly, this check came from Mr. Harper's personal account. He purchased the property in full. No mortgage, no loan. Every receipt, every repair, every improvement since then paid by him. He slid the binder of receipts forward. Roof replacement, furnace upgrade, property taxes, all under Grandpa's name. Lisa leaned over to whisper something to Dad, but the judge cut her off sharply. Mrs. Harper, you'll remain silent, unless spoken to. James continued, his tone sharp and controlled. The defendants, however, demanded that Mr. Harper pay rent $1,200, later $1,500 for living in a property he funded entirely. This is not family generosity. This is financial exploitation. Dad's lawyer, a man in an ill-fitting suit, stood and cleared his throat. Your Honor, this was clearly a gift. Mr. Harper transferred the title willingly. My clients have cared for him for years. James turned toward them, his voice almost gentle. A gift, Your Honor, does not come with a monthly bill attached. A quiet laugh rippled through the gallery. Even the judge's lips twitched before she leaned forward. "Mr. Harper, the son," she said, addressing my dad directly, "did you contribute any money toward the original purchase of this property?" Dad hesitated. "Not directly, but it was, yes or no, Mr. Harper," he swallowed. "No, Your Honor." "And did you or your wife pay for property taxes, maintenance, or renovations in the past 15 years? "No," he admitted softly. Lisa shot him a glare, sharp enough to cut glass. The judge made a note. "Proceed." Then James called the forensic examiner, a man with silver hair and a calm authority. He explained how every transaction was traced, every deposit verified. "In my expert opinion," he said, 100% of the funds used for purchase and maintenance originated from Mr. Harper's accounts. No financial contribution from the defendants was identified. It was clinical, precise, and devastating. When Patricia Henderson, the neighbor, took the stand, her voice trembled but never broke. "I've lived next door since 2010, she said. Everyone knew this was Mr. Harper's house. He mowed the lawn, fixed the roof, even replaced the fence. His son barely visited." Lisa folded her arms. Dad's shoulders slumped. When the judge finally spoke, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Based on the evidence presented, this court recognizes the plaintiff, Mr. Sylvester Harper, as the equitable owner of the property at 2847 Maple Street. She paused, letting the words hang like a verdict carved in stone. Furthermore, the court finds that the defendants engaged in unlawful eviction. They are hereby ordered to compensate the plaintiff $12,000 for damages and temporary housing costs. Lisa gasped. Dad stared at the floor, motionless. Grandpa didn't gloat. He simply nodded once and whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." As we walked out of the courtroom, I turned to him, still dazed. "You won," I breathed. He smiled faintly. "No, Emma, justice isn't a win. It's balance, and balance takes patience." Behind us, I heard Lisa's voice crack. "What do we do now?" And my dad's quiet, broken answer. "Pray he's done." But Grandpa wasn't done. Not yet. The weeks after the hearing felt like living inside the eye of a storm. Everything was too quiet until it wasn't. At first, Dad tried to act like nothing had happened. He went to work. Lisa posted photos online about new beginnings and moving forward. But you can't polish a sinking ship. The cracks started to show fast. The BMW disappeared from the driveway one morning. A tow truck had come at dawn. When I asked Lisa about it, she said sharply, "Temporary issue. We're refinancing." But I saw the bank letter stuffed in the trash, notice of repossession. Then came the whisper around the neighborhood. Patricia mentioned a for sale listing she saw online, our address, with bright photos of the house and a price tag of $480,000, well below market value. My stomach dropped. I checked. It was true. There it was, live on every real estate website. Motivated sellers, quick closing possible. "Grandpa, they're selling the house!" I burst out when I reached the motel. He looked up from his notebook calmly, like he'd expected this. "That's not a sale," he said. "That's panic." "But they can't." "Technically, they can," he interrupted, his voice measured. "But not for long." He picked up the phone, dialed James Morrison, and within hours, the lawyer had filed an emergency injunction. The next morning, we were back in court. The same judge from before looked tired but curious. "Mr. Morrison, you're back so soon." James explained everything. The active lawsuit, the forensic ruling, the attempted property sale. He ended with a quiet, devastating line. "Your Honor, selling this property now would destroy evidence, erase restitution, and nullify the court's recognition of ownership." The judge turned to Dad and Lisa, both sitting stiffly beside their realtor. "Were you aware of pending litigation when you listed this property?" The realtor blinked, then said weakly, "They didn't tell me, Your Honor." The judge sighed, pen tapping the desk. "Then I'm issuing a temporary injunction. This sale is hereby suspended until the case concludes. File the order with the county recorder immediately." Lisa's face drained of color. Dad's shoulders slumped like a man finally realizing the game was over. By that afternoon, the listing was gone, and the spiral began. 2 weeks later, I drove by the house again. The lawn was overgrown. The mailbox stuffed with envelopes. One of them caught my eye, a bright red notice from the bank. Foreclosure proceedings, 90. Day default. I showed it to Grandpa that night. He didn't even need to open it. They borrowed against the house, he said. Home equity line. Probably 80,000 or more. And they stopped paying? Of course. That's why they needed my pension. I sat there in silence, the weight of everything sinking in. They hadn't just tried to control Grandpa, they were drowning, and they tried to drag him down with them. What happens now? I asked quietly. He folded the notice neatly, his expression unreadable. Now the foundation collapses. A month later, the bank repossessed their car. Lisa's jewelry started appearing on Facebook Marketplace. Groceries got cheaper, smaller, fewer. I watched them fade from the comfortable people they once pretended to be into something hollow. When the final ruling came, the official transfer of title, Grandpa didn't cheer, didn't gloat. He just nodded once and said, "I don't celebrate collapse, Emma. I rebuild after it." And that night, as the rain hit the motel window, I realized the truth. They hadn't just lost a house. They'd lost the only man who ever believed in them, and the silence that followed was the sound of justice settling in. Moving day came like the end of a long winter. The sky was clear, the air almost too gentle for what it marked. A moving truck idled outside 2847 Maple Street, our family home, the place where betrayal and justice had collided. Dad and Lisa were already there, boxing up the last of their things. They didn't look at me when I walked up with Grandpa. Lisa's hair was tied up carelessly, her eyes red-rimmed. Dad looked older, shoulders slumped, face drained of that self-assured arrogance he used to wear like armor. Grandpa stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. He didn't say a word as they carried their boxes past him. Finally, Dad stopped in front of him, holding a small box of photo frames. "Dad," he said hoarsely. "I should've. I don't know. I thought..." Grandpa didn't let him finish. He simply nodded once. "You thought taking would make you stronger," he said softly. "But you only built your strength on someone else's foundation, and that never lasts." Lisa avoided his gaze. "We didn't mean..." "You meant every word," Grandpa interrupted, not cruelly but firmly. "You both just didn't expect consequences." He stepped aside, letting them walk to the car. No shouting, no revenge, just the quiet weight of truth. When the car door slammed shut and their taillights disappeared down the street, Grandpa exhaled a long, tired sigh that seemed to carry years of hurt out into the open air. I turned to him. "It's over," I whispered. "No," he said, smiling faintly. "It's balanced." Inside, the house felt different. The tension that once hung in every room had dissolved, replaced by a kind of peace I hadn't known existed. The sunlight through the window didn't feel cold anymore. We sat together in the kitchen, the same spot where everything had started. Grandpa poured 2 cups of coffee, added cream the way he liked, and handed one to me. "You know, Emma," he said, "silence is the most underestimated weapon in the world. People think it means surrender, but it's just preparation." I smiled through the lump in my throat. "You never lost control, did you?" He chuckled softly. "I just stopped pretending I didn't have it." Outside, the maple trees swayed in the breeze. For the first time in months, the house wasn't a battlefield, it was a home again. I sipped my coffee, watching Grandpa lean back in his chair, peaceful at last. Justice hadn't come with noise or vengeance. It had arrived quietly like sunrise, after a long night, restoring not just a house, but the dignity they thought they'd taken from him. And this time, the silence wasn't war, it was victory.